To be part of MIT Club of New Hampshire. As you know, I spent lots of years at MIT beyond my graduation in various departments and various capacities. And so my agenda is very quickly, I will get you to the new frontiers of creativity. And there is a particular purpose for me to emphasize on creative teaching as well as creative learning and how we can achieve that with highly adaptive interfaces. Then we go into some of the ideas about brain-based learning and what's happening in the neurophysiology and how we can look at the brain through the windows of technology. And we will talk about that and how that connects again to the creative thinking and what we know about creative thinking on that. And then we get into the pedagogical framework that we need in order to provide that facility. And then I'll show you one case study from MIT itself, which is a physics interactive video tutor project, which I was personally involved in, where we recorded Walter Lewin and his lectures. If you go now and you see all his lectures from 801, which is Newtonian physics, the freshman physics, that were all done under this project, under my supervision. And then we'll talk about some of the ideas about brain-machine interface and how we can use that for enhancing creativity, and also using some of the brain wave concepts. And hopefully I can show you some of those brain waves and see if you can get into the theta mode where you will be in a trance situation to create that kind of meditative environment to learn. And then finally I'll talk about MOOCs. How many of you know about MOOCs? What is MOOC? MOOC is massive open online course. And this is the tsunami that we were talking about. I heard the word tsunami, which is that the top universities, including Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, you name it, they are now providing free courses in the very hard courses, online free, for anyone and everyone in the world. And typically their enrollment is about 100,000 to 150,000 students, where I have observed them very carefully, and I worked with EDX project and some of the projects that I'm observing as the co-chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum in the area of education technology. So I'll talk about some of those nuances which is happening when you scale up an MIT course and open it up for everyone in the world. What happens?
Most people don't finish.
That's correct. So we'll talk about why and how we want to really get over that problem, which is the problem of what we call attrition. That only 5% would complete. So my question when I was talking earlier was that if you teach a course and 95% of your students fail, would you be hired again? And I'm sure you would not be hired even if you were a MIT professor. So I think, but these courses are going to change the way education is done because they are free. So now we're talking about an economic situation where a student from India or China in remote village can take a MIT course with the topmost professor with the best teaching. However, with the delivery mechanism, which I don't think is optimum right now, but they at least have access to it. And so how would they change the playing field? So we'll focus on that. So let's start with some statistics. If you look at, there are about 80 million students who take courses, both K-12 as well as higher education, 80 million students. And it's growing number. Out of that, if you look at the numbers that we are looking here, is 1.5%, and I'm talking about higher education here, so which is only 20 million of the slice that we are looking into, this 80 million slice. Of that are going for the PhD. And then you can look at a lot of students here, high school completion 31.2%. That means those 31.2% students have not got bachelor's degree. Think about that. And I think that's where most of the online education is coming back, because you did not get your degree when you came out of the high school, you took up a job, and now you are stuck in that menial job because you do not have a degree. So now you are going to go to an online program like Phoenix or Kaplan, one of those, and that's where, that is the underserved population which is going for online education. So if you look at University of New Hampshire, I think the adult education is a big part of that group which is coming online to finish their bachelor's degree master's degree, and even PhDs now, which is provided by these. So I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of this industry is growing through. This is some data about how this industry and the data in terms of elementary and secondary, post-secondary education. So if you look at higher education is about reaching 20 million, and rest is undergraduate, rest is looking at the high school, etc. The reason we have to be very, very, I would say, sensitive about the educational attainment, because that is directly connected with your earnings. And I think if you look at here, there's also difference between males and females. In the recent election, that was a big issue. And I think we still have to solve that issue, that why there is a difference between male and female earning. So I think if you look at a bachelor's degree, 62,440 for the male and 46,830. These are the national averages, and this data is coming from national statistics from the national data centers. So these are the average data that we are looking at. Now if you look at earning by the field of study, you are looking at the area, let's say, mathematics and other sciences, and if you look at the education, so there are differences as well in terms of your earning with the kind of areas that you are going to go into education. Now if you look at the global education expenditure of part of the GDP, United States is not number one in that. There are other countries who are spending much bigger part of the GDP, and that's where what we are seeing is that the number one position of United States in the education has slipped to about 16th to 18th number in high school, primarily because everyone else is catching up, and there are different educational models, and we will talk about some of those models. So I think some of these areas have to be looked at and how we spend our dollars into it. And if you look at the enrollment across the globe, is also changing. So I think if you look at a lot of other parts of the world are now becoming part of the educational system, and they are going to compete with every student in the United States. And that is the contention, what we call the world has become flat, as we talked about. So then the question comes is, what are the global education forces? So if you look at here, we live in highly, what we call hyper-connected world via internet. And I personally experienced that when in the recent storm Sandy, I did not have any internet access for 1.5 days. And I was besides myself because I needed that connection. I was totally not connected. Even TV was not working, nothing was working. For 1.5 days, I know there are some people still struggling with that, and my heart goes out to them. But I think that we are living in highly successful, but that is going to become the norm, because we are looking at a lot of growth of homeschooling, as well as we are looking at the population, which is growing population of disabled students. And if you look at every 80 person now, there's one autistic children. So that number has been updated. So I think this is a very high number which is coming out. And so if you look at 6 to 8% of the population of students in the school is disabled population of different kind of disability, which are recognized by IDEA, which you all know about. So I think if you look at that, we are also looking at the competition is now spread across MIT to IIT and HBS to IIM. So I think we are looking at the world where we have emerging forces of China, India, and Brazil. So the question is that in this highly hyper-connected world, how do we compete, and how do we teach, and how do we learn? So if you look at, this is the thesis, is one of the things that differentiates United States education, and I come from India, so I know both sides of the Atlantic. And I was privileged and lucky to be in Indian Institute of Technology, which is highly sought after school, just like MIT in the United States. So I've seen both sides of it. And what I know that these kinds of opportunities are very hard to come by, as you have to be highly privileged and lucky to be there. But what I see in the cross-culturalization is when I came from IIT to MIT, there was a big difference, primarily because there was a component which was not the rote component. In highly competitive world, we were pretty much based on the rote-based model where we would remember everything, we'll try to practice it hundreds of times in order to be perfect scores in the competitive exams and competitive courses. When you come to MIT, it was not like that. It was about creativity. It was about problem solving. It was about critical thinking. It was about creative thinking. And I think that's where I make the contention is that the reason United States still has the highest research output from the top universities. If you look at the number of publications and the research that comes out, which is NSF funded, and a lot of the Nobel laureates, there was recently I saw an article from NSF that out of I would say about 80 to 100 Nobel laureates, they were all funded from United States, were funded by NSF. So that kind of supremacy, if we have to keep, or what we want to keep the level up, what we have to turn into is to create creative educators and creative differentiator of United States education. If you look at, and I always give this example of the Wright brothers, who were mechanics working in a cycle shop, they were fixing bicycles, but they solved one of the biggest problems of aviation, which most of the scientists of that time could not solve. And I think that's what we call as creativity. And I think there are a lot of such examples, and that comes out of the thinking is that creativity is a process that involves generation of new ideas, concepts, new associations between existing ideas and extending them, and then creating something new which is useful and utilizable. And these pictures, of course, are from Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, which obviously was not successful to fly, but he did come up with some of the designs for that. So if you look at, my emphasis is on creative learning and creative thinking, because one-size-fits-all model does not work. We have seen that over and over and over again, and I think I'm going to cite some of these things. So what are the parts of creative thinking if you look at here? Number one is imagination. You have to have vivid imagination. And I think you need to be able to imagine that, and I think the good example just came out when I was talking to David, when we were having dinner, is that in his fraternity in MIT, they would, for the pledges, they have to come up with a new machine. And so they have to have very vivid imagination in the basement of that fraternity to figure out what parts are we going to connect to create this wonderful machine. And I think that's number one for the creativity. And that was subjected to the fresh pledges who were the freshmen. And I think that's the kind of environment which encourages creative thinking. And then generating new ideas and what we also call divergent thinking. If you look at most of the teaching and education outside the United States, it's very convergent thinking education. There is one answer, you need to get answer, and you need to have exact answer in order to survive, in order to get the perfect score. But divergent thinking says that, no, there could be several ways of doing it, there could be several ways of getting to the answer, and we want to see how many different ways you can get to it. And I think that's one of the big differentiators in terms of creative individual, that you have to have divergent thinking. And if you look at most of the research at MIT and other places like that, is multidisciplinary. A physician working with the physicist have created a lot of these multidisciplinary medical devices. Think about the artificial heart, which was created with fluid mechanics concept by the physician working with the physics. And I think that's the kind of multidisciplinary divergent thinking has to be required there. And that's where we look at some of these ideas of innovation, which we'll talk about. So let me give you a quiz. How many of you know these individuals? Can you identify on the left top? Of course we know. This is the most famous. Who's the second one here?
Picasso.
That's Pablo Picasso. What about him?
Gandhi.
That's the Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. What about him? 1882 to 1971. Not known? Igor Stravinsky, the musician. So if you look at, these are four different kind of creativity that you are looking at. which comes from, if you look at the time, 1879 to 1955. That's the decade we are looking at. Now look at the today's creativity. So let's identify these individuals. Let's see if you can guess that. On the left top, of course, Bill Gates. So who is the next to him? Steve Jobs. What about this young kid? Mark Zuckerberg. So what about these two individuals?
Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
That's right. So these are the Googles. So we have Google, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. So if you look at these, there is a shift now in the creativity going from Einstein, Gandhi, Picasso, and Stravinsky to now Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and all these people. So if you look at that, what has really kept this engine going is the creativity. If you look at Steve Jobs' creativity in terms of the user interfaces and the design, design became a big thing for the technology to go with the usability and use of the different kinds of iPod and iPad. And that's where we are looking at the next generation of the individuals that we teach. Although if you look at most of them, not all of them, are there's dropouts, school dropouts. So I think what we are trying to say is that our education system is not encouraging creative individuals to remain in the system because it is still very confined. And that's where creative individuals become very impatient, say, this is not for me, I'm getting out and starting my own company. So I think how can we tap into that creativity aspect and use the adaptive learning for that? And so of course, technology becomes very much a tool for applying those kinds of ideas and bringing everyone together in this creative model of education. And there are lots of technologies, there is no dearth of them. Mobile learning, which has become part of it, and if you look at, there are 3 times more mobile devices than the laptops. And if you look at it, it's growing, it's almost like 2 billion mobile devices are out there and it's growing every day. If you look at a person who is drawing rickshaw in India, he owns 3 cell phones. He may not have any laptop, but he owns 3 cell phones. And those are coming from Nokia and other places. And so these are the tools now we can become truly ubiquitous in terms of sending out the education. So if you look at your augmented reality, collaborative learning, which you are encouraging there with the teachers, you have virtual learning, serious game, and there is a talk about gamification of education. How can we do that? We'll talk about that. And then about immersive learning, VRML, and I did some research at MIT on that, so we had head-mounted displays. And we will have this virtual reality in order to create virtual lab where you can touch and feel. Guess what happened? Most of the students were dizzy because as soon as you put head-mounted display and you move, you have a difference in your, the balance of your ears and how you turn your head. And so we couldn't apply that because most of the students had to get used to it before they could use that. And NASA uses that virtual reality in order to train their astronauts to do spacewalk, and they still do that. But some of these ideas can be utilized. Teleoperated experiments, we created labs where you could run experiments from anywhere in the world. Hubble telescope was a good example of that you could run an experiment on Hubble, even high school students would participate in that process. So, and that's happening more and more, and finally, we are now going towards adaptive learning. When I gave some of my talks in about 1998, 99, and talked about adaptive learning, people were saying, what are you talking about? Today, if I talk adaptive learning, everyone understands that. If you look at the publishers, if you look at teachers, and everyone is now coming to adaptive learning. But beyond adaptive learning, we are also looking at what we call brain-based synaptic learning, because we are going right inside the brain with brain-machine interfaces. So now we will know in real time what you are thinking by putting EEG probes on you, and those experiments are happening day to day. And I can, even when you are dreaming of swimming, actually your brain is doing the same part of the brain lights up that you do when you are actually swimming yourself. So I think if I can map those real work that you are doing day to day, I would know exactly what you are thinking. So I can now send some subliminal messages, get up, You have an exam coming. Prepare, prepare. So I think we are not trying to go becoming the big brother or 1984 and things like that. What we are saying, we can now understand and provide an interface that will work very well with the individual learning framework. And that's where disability and the student with disability comes quite a bit. I do teach music. And the reason I talk about creativity, because I'm a musician, besides a scientist and technologist, and I teach Indian drumming called tabla. And if we have time, I may show you some videos of that. But what we try to do there is teach them creativity. And what I find is that I have some autistic kids in my classroom, and what I find is that if I reach them in the right way, they do extremely well. In fact, they do better than the other kids. So I think that's where my contention is, that if we have the right kind of interface and we get to the brain, we can equalize the playing field for everyone who is trying to learn.